They sent us the bill for our own rescue. Commander Ava Rostova stood on the bridge of the starship Archimedes, her jaw tight. Before her, the tactical display showed the fleet of the enigmatic Cathar Syndicate, their ships like polished obsidian daggers against the nebular glow of the cradle. We were diplomats, explorers on a mission of first contact that had gone disastrously wrong when a stellar flare crippled our drives. The Cathar had answered our distress call, their assistance swift and efficient. Now we understood the price. An emissary was en route carrying an invoice that promised to be more than a simple request for resources. Rostova's knuckles were white where she gripped the command rail. She could feel the cold hum of the ship's lifeblood beneath her palms. This was not a negotiation. It was the prelude to a public inquiry, one that would be broadcast across a dozen systems with humanity's honor on the ledger. The Cathar emissary, a being of flowing crystalline limbs and a voice like shattering ice, materialized on the main screen. "Commander Rostova," it chimed, its tone devoid of warmth. "We trust our assistance was satisfactory. The gratitude tithe is now due." Around her, the bridge crew exchanged uneasy glances. The term was new alien, yet its implications felt ancient and predatory. Rostova met the emissary's gaze, her own reflection staring back from the polished surface of the screen. Her first duty was to her crew, her second, to the articles of the Terran Alliance which forbade capitulation to economic predators. The Cathar had a reputation for their unique brand of justice, a system of binding contracts and enforced obligations that bordered on servitude. This was their method, a legalistic conquest masquerading as benevolence. The gratitude tithe was a collar forged from our own need. Our fleet mind, Julian manifested as a shimmering light beside her, his synthesized voice a calm counterpoint to the rising tension. "Commander, their demand is based on their interpretation of the Interstellar Compact's emergency aid clauses. They have calculated the life value of every soul aboard this fleet." Rostova's heart grew cold. This was not about fuel or repairs. It was about ownership. The Cathar believed they had purchased a debt of life, a debt they intended to collect in perpetuity. She looked at her tactical officer, Lieutenant Aris Thorne, whose face was a mask of controlled fury. "They want to make us a vassal fleet, bound by a law of their own making," Aris said, his voice low. Rostova nodded, her path clarifying. "We would not fight them with weapons. We would fight them with their own system. We would demand a public audit, a full accounting of their gratitude, and we would mirror it back onto them cost for cost, line for line, until the entire sector saw the truth." In the civilian sector of the Archimedes, a young girl named Lily clutched a datapad watching a looped recording of Earth's blue oceans. Her parents had signed on for this mission, believing in a universe of shared discovery. Now a quiet fear had settled over the family habitation decks. They listened to the filtered ship-wide announcements, hearing the carefully chosen words of their commander, but sensing the unspoken weight behind them. The Cathar ships were not a rescue party. They were a foreclosure notice on a future they had yet to build. "They have invoked the Pact of Emergent Obligation," Julian stated, his light pulsing with the rhythm of incoming data streams. "A legal framework of their own design, which they claim is compatible with galactic common law. It is a masterpiece of predatory jurisprudence." Rostova paced the bridge, the hum of the ship a constant companion. The Cathar weren't pirates. They were accountants with warships. Their power was not in their guns, but in their ledgers. "They've offered us 2 options," Aris reported, his fingers flying across his console. "Permanent servitude of 10% of our fleet's operational capacity, or the forfeiture of our independent charter. We become their subjects or their property." The choice was no choice at all. It was the illusion of consent, a classic tactic of those who conquer with contracts instead of cannons. Rostova stopped before the main screen, where the Cathar emissary waited with unnerving patience. "Emissary," she began, her voice steady and clear, broadcast across all channels to the waiting fleets. "Humanity expresses its profound gratitude for your timely assistance. In the spirit of reciprocity, as is our custom, we request a formal inquiry to publicly acknowledge the magnitude of our debt." She paused, letting the words hang in the space between them. "We wish to ensure the entire galaxy understands the full measure of Cathar benevolence." A subtle shift in the emissary's crystalline form suggested surprise. This was not the response they expected. They anticipated anger, fear, or a desperate plea for mercy. They were not prepared for a demand to have their methods illuminated for all to see. "This fleet teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars." The Cathar could not refuse. To do so would be to admit their gratitude. Tithe was something to be hidden, a shameful secret rather than a point of pride. They had built a trap of law, and we were forcing them to sit in it. Julian's light flickered approvingly. "Commander, they have accepted. They are transmitting the coordinates for the public inquiry. A neutral venue, a data nexus known as the Aurora Court." The name sent a ripple through the bridge crew. The Aurora Court was not a physical place, but a nexus of instantaneous communication, a grand theater of interstellar politics, where reputations were made and broken. It was a place of judgment where light-speed data streams carried testimony and evidence across the stars. This was exactly what Rostova had hoped for. The Cathar believed their complex legal arguments would overwhelm a younger race. They had miscalculated. Humanity had its own long and storied history with the fine print of contracts. On the civilian decks, news of the impending inquiry brought a fragile sense of hope. In the ship's hydroponics bay, a botanist named Lena stopped her work listening to the commander's address echo from a nearby speaker. She looked at the rows of terrestrial plants, a small patch of Earth so far from home. The fight wasn't just about ships and charters. It was about the right to carry your home with you, to plant your own garden among the stars without a landlord demanding a tithe on every leaf. The gratitude they felt for their rescue was real, but the price demanded would poison it, turning a lifeline into a leash. "Julian, I want every record of this interaction." Rostova ordered, her mind already racing ahead. "Every communication, every energy transfer, every nanosecond of their assistance. We are going to build a case." The AI's form pulsed. "Already compiled, Commander. I have also cross-referenced Cathar history. Their pattern is consistent. They find a civilization in crisis, offer aid, and then leverage the debt to absorb them. They have consumed 3 minor polities in this sector alone. We were not their first victim. We were merely the latest." The revelation settled heavily on the bridge. This was not an isolated act of opportunism. It was a systematic campaign of conquest by coercion. Humanity was not just fighting for its own freedom, but for the principle that a helping hand should not come with a hidden chain. Aris Thorne brought up a projection of the Aurora Court's protocols. "It's an open forum, Commander. Any civilization with a registered beacon can observe and under certain conditions offer testimony. The Cathar will have their allies, their prior beneficiaries, speaking to the legitimacy of their system." Rostova nodded. "Then we need to find witnesses of our own." Julian scanned the records of those absorbed polities. "Look for dissent, for protests that were silenced, for evidence of the true cost of the gratitude tithe." Justice required more than truth. It required an audience. The fleet mind processed the request in a silent cascade of light. "There are whispers, Commander. Sub-channel communications, encrypted data caches, stories of worlds slowly strangled by endless obligation. It will take time to verify, but the pattern is there." The Cathar emissary's ship, a sleek, menacing vessel, remained stationed off their bow, a constant reminder of the stakes. The emissary itself had signed off its final communication, a chime of chilling confidence. We look forward to this public accounting. The galaxy will see the virtue of our ways. They believed their system was unassailable, a perfect engine of reciprocal exchange. They could not conceive of a flaw in their logic, a variable they had not accounted for. That variable was human nature, the stubborn refusal to assign a monetary value to life and liberty. A rescuer who demands your future is not a savior. They are a predator. Rostova looked out at the star-dusted void, her resolve hardening into something cold and sharp. The Aurora court awaited. The trial would not be one of military might, but of moral calculus, and she intended to present a bill of her own. The journey to the designated coordinates for the Aurora court was a period of intense preparation. Rostova and her team worked tirelessly, poring over Cathar legal precedents and galactic common law. Julian, the fleet mind, became a whirlwind of data sifting through centuries of interstellar case law, searching for a lever, a fulcrum point they could use to turn the Cathar's own system against them. The AI's logic was relentless, but Rostova found herself pushing back against its purely utilitarian calculations. "It's not just about proving they are wrong in law, Julian," she explained during one late-night strategy session. "We have to prove they are wrong in principle. We have to show that their system is not just exploitative, but corrosive to the very idea of a galactic community." Julian's light softened. "The principle has a lower probability of success than a direct legal challenge, Commander." Rostova countered, "But it is a victory that would endure. The law is a weapon, but morality is the armor that wields it." Aris Thorne, meanwhile, was tasked with a different kind of preparation. He was coordinating with the civilian population, gathering their stories. He interviewed engineers who had worked alongside the Cathar repair crews, medics who had received aid for the injured, and parents who had watched the alien ships arrive, with a mixture of hope and fear. Each story was a thread in the tapestry they were weaving, a testament to the human cost that the Cathar's ledgers ignored. He found a recurring theme: the Cathar were meticulously precise in their aid, but utterly devoid of empathy. They did not comfort the wounded or reassure the frightened. They performed a service, and their every action was recorded, logged, and valued. Their kindness was a transaction, their compassion a calculated expense. In a small cabin, a maintenance technician recorded his testimony for Aris. "They fixed the plasma conduit in record time," he said, his face etched with a weary respect. "But when my assistant got a mild radiation burn, they logged the medical salve they offered as a separate line item. Amelioration of personnel inefficiency, they called it. They weren't healing a person. They were repairing a component." This was the evidence Rostova needed, the human element that would transform their legal argument into a moral indictment. The Cathar saw living beings as assets, their well-being a factor in an equation of productivity. Humanity saw something more, something that could never be quantified on a balance sheet. That was the ground on which they would make their stand. As they neared the nexus, Julian uncovered a crucial piece of information, a detail buried in the Cathar's own public records. "Commander, I have analyzed the energy signatures of the stellar flare that disabled us. The event was not entirely natural." Rostova's blood ran cold. "Explain." The AI's light sharpened, displaying a complex waveform analysis on the main screen. "There are anomalies, trace elements of a directed energy weapon designed to induce a solar event. The flare was encouraged. Its timing was too precise, its impact too specific to our fleet's position. The implication was monstrous. The Cathar had not simply taken advantage of a disaster. They had engineered it. The rescue was a lie planted in the soil of a crime. This changed everything. It escalated the conflict from a dispute over salvage law to a criminal conspiracy, but it also presented a new danger. "Can you prove it?" Rostova asked, her voice barely a whisper. "The evidence is circumstantial," Julian admitted. "The energy signature is faint, degraded. The Cathar would claim it is sensor ghosting, a malfunction of our own equipment. To accuse them without definitive proof would be seen as a desperate slander. It could cost us what little credibility we have. A tyrant's greatest shield is the presumption of good faith." Rostova stood in silence, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. To use the information was a gamble that could backfire spectacularly. To ignore it felt like a betrayal of the truth. The civilian population was unaware of this new, terrifying discovery. On the eve of the inquiry, the ship's mess hall was filled with an anxious energy. Families ate their meals in hushed tones, the children sensing the gravity of the moment. One father, a structural engineer, tried to explain the situation to his son. "It's like this," he said, using food cubes to represent the ships. "Our house broke down and the Cathar helped us fix it. Now they say we have to give them one of our rooms. Forever." The boy looked at the cubes, his expression serious. "But it's our house," he said with the simple, unassailable logic of a child. That was the core of it all, the truth that transcended legal jargon and complex treaties. It was their house. Rostova made her decision. They would not lead with the accusation of sabotage. They would hold it in reserve, a hidden blade. Their primary strategy would remain the same: to expose the inherent immorality of the gratitude tithe. They would use the Cathar's own obsession with accounting against them. "Julian," she commanded, "prepare a full audit of our own. Let's calculate the true cost of this rescue. Not just the fuel and the parts, but the lost time, the emotional distress, the violation of our sovereignty. We will present our own ledger at the Aurora Court. A mirror reflects not just the image, but the light in which it is seen." The AI began its work, its processing cores glowing with renewed intensity. The Archimedes and its fleet arrived at the Nexus, a silent point in space where 1,000 invisible threads of communication converged. The trial was about to begin. The Aurora Court was not a place of stone and wood, but of pure information. As the Archimedes entered the designated coordinates, the bridge was bathed in a soft, ethereal light. A cascade of data streamed into their systems, and the main screen transformed into a panoramic view of a virtual amphitheater. Hundreds of sigils and emblems shimmered in the air, representing the assembled powers of the sector corporate states, ancient monarchies, nascent republics, and silent observers from the far reaches of the galaxy. Each was a witness. In the center of this grand assembly, two platforms materialized. One held the sigil of the Terran Alliance, the other the stark geometric emblem of the Cathar Syndicate. The air on the bridge was thick with anticipation. The public inquiry had begun. A neutral arbiter represented by a sphere of pure white light spoke in a synthesized voice that echoed across the data stream. "This inquiry is convened to adjudicate the claim of gratitude tithe levied by the Cathar Syndicate upon the Terran Alliance fleet under the command of Eva Rostova. The Cathar may present their claim." The crystalline emissary from before appeared on the Cathar platform, its form sharp and defined in the virtual space. Its voice chimed through the bridge speakers, confident and clear. "Honored members of this assembly, we are here today not as conquerors, but as upholders of cosmic balance. The Terran fleet was adrift, their lives forfeit to the uncaring void. We intervened. We expended resources, diverted assets, and applied our considerable expertise to save them." The emissary gestured, and a detailed ledger scrolled into view beside it, a dizzying column of figures and technical specifications. We ask for no more than what is just. Our laws, the very foundation of our stable and prosperous society, are built upon the principle of reciprocity. A life saved incurs a debt. A civilization saved incurs an obligation. The gratitude tithe is not a punishment. It is the honorable fulfillment of that obligation. A murmur of approval rippled through some of the assembled sigils. The Cathar's argument was clean logical and appealed to the transactional nature of many interstellar powers. To them, it was simple accounting. The Arbiter's light turned towards the Terran sigil. "Commander Rostova, you may respond." Rostova stood, her image projected onto her own platform. She met the gaze of the assembly, her heart pounding a steady rhythm against her ribs. "We do not dispute that we were saved," she began, her voice calm and measured. "We do not dispute that we owe a debt of gratitude. Humanity has always believed in paying its debts." She paused, letting her words sink in. "But we are here to dispute the currency. The Cathar have presented you with a ledger of parts and labor. They have calculated the cost of their assistance down to the last energy credit. Now allow me to present our ledger." At her signal, Julian projected a second ledger into the virtual space. It was not filled with numbers, but with images and sounds. The face of the young girl Lily watching the oceans of Earth on her datapad. The voice of the maintenance technician describing the cold, transactional nature of the Cathar's aid. The weary but determined faces of her crew, working to rebuild their ship and their lives. The Cathar ledger measures the cost of survival. Rostova declared, her voice rising with passion. Ours measures the value of what was saved. They speak of assets and resources. We speak of lives, hopes, and the future of a people. A different kind of accounting was being called for, one that balanced souls, not credits. The Cathar emissary remained impassive. "Your sentiment is noted, Commander. But sentiment is not a recognized currency in interstellar law. Your ledger is an emotional appeal, not a legal argument. We provided tangible goods and services. We demand tangible compensation." The logic was cold hard, and to many in the assembly correct. An undercurrent of agreement flowed from the emblems of the more pragmatic, commerce-focused civilizations. Rostova had anticipated this. She was not trying to win over the entire assembly, not yet. She was speaking to the others, the ones who remembered a time before every interaction was a transaction, before every act of kindness came with an itemized bill. "You are correct." Rostova conceded, a move that surprised her own crew. "Emotion is not currency, so let us speak in terms you understand. Let us speak of costs." She turned her attention back to the Cathar's ledger. "You have billed us for the fuel used in the rescue. It is a fair charge. You have billed us for the materials used in the repairs. Also fair. But you have also included a line item here," she said, highlighting a massive figure on their list. "Risk assessment and asset diversion. You are charging us for the mere possibility that your ships could have been doing something more profitable. True predators, Shah. Built off hunt. Not just the kill. By your own logic," she continued. "If we are to be billed for your risks, then we must also be allowed to audit them. We request a full, unredacted record of all Cathar fleet movements and commercial activities for the cycle preceding our distress call. We need to verify that the assets you diverted were in fact engaged in activities of a value that justifies this exorbitant charge." This was a calculated gambit. The Cathar's commercial dealings were notoriously secretive. To expose them to public scrutiny would be anathema to them. The emissary's crystalline form seemed to vibrate with displeasure. Our internal fleet dispositions are proprietary. They are not relevant to the service rendered. They are if you make them part of the bill, Aris muttered on the bridge. Rostova pressed her advantage. Are you refusing to substantiate your own invoice, emissary? You have brought us to this public forum to demonstrate the transparency and justice of your system. Surely that transparency extends to your own accounting. A new murmur went through the assembly, this one laced with suspicion. A creditor who refuses to show their books is a creditor with something to hide. The first crack appeared in the armor of their logic. The arbiter's light pulsed. The request is relevant to the claim. The Cathar Syndicate will provide the requested data for independent verification. The emissary hesitated for a fraction of a second, a delay that was screamingly obvious in the instantaneous world of the Aurora Court. We will comply, it chimed, the sound strained. Rostova had won the first exchange. She had turned their own meticulousness into a weapon, forcing them onto the defensive. They had wanted a trial about the size of humanity's debt. She was turning it into a trial about the legitimacy of their business practices. The mirror was beginning to turn. While Julian began the monumental task of sifting through the newly released Cathar data logs, Rostova moved to the next phase of her plan. The Cathar claim their gratitude tithe is an honorable system, a cornerstone of their society, she announced to the court. They speak of it as a benefit, a way to integrate other civilizations into their prosperous collective. We believe the court deserves to hear from those who have already accepted this honor. Before the Cathar could object, she submitted a formal request to the arbiter. We call the Zithani Dominion, the Pilar Collective, and the Free Traders of the Rylos Cluster to testify regarding their experience under the Cathar's benevolent system. The sigils of the three civilizations, all of whom had been assisted by the Cathar in the past, flickered in the assembly. They were small, minor powers long since absorbed into the Cathar's economic sphere. They were, for all intents and purposes, vassal states. Calling them to testify was a direct challenge to the Cathar's authority. The voice of the debtor is the creditor's true judgment. The Cathar emissary immediately objected. These are internal matters of the syndicate. The satisfaction of our partners is not a subject for public debate. The arbiter's light flared. Commander Rostova has framed her defense on the nature of the tithe itself. Testimony regarding its application is therefore relevant. The witnesses will be heard. One by one, their representatives appeared. A Zithani, a being of feathered scales, spoke of a world whose vibrant culture was now reduced to a monoculture producing goods solely for the Cathar market. A Pilar, a silicon-based life form, described how their planet's rich mineral wealth had been systematically stripped, with the profits funneled into the syndicate's coffers, all under the guise of repaying the debt. The free trader from Rylos told of a once thriving merchant fleet, now bound to transport Cathar cargo at fixed, uncompetitive rates. Their stories were a chilling echo of each other, a tale of hope turning to obligation, obligation to servitude, and servitude to despair. They spoke in flat, emotionless tones the language of the defeated. But their words painted a vivid picture of a galaxy slowly being consumed by a creeping, legalistic cancer. A debt paid with freedom is the definition of slavery. The testimony was devastating. It laid bare the truth behind the Cathar's elegant legal framework. The gratitude tithe was not a system of reciprocity. It was an engine of conquest, more efficient and far more insidious than any warship. It conquered not with fire and steel, but with contracts and compliance. It left the infrastructure intact, but hollowed out the soul of a people, turning them into cogs in the Cathar's vast economic machine. The mood in the Aurora court had shifted palpably. The sigils of the assembled powers were no longer murmuring with approval for the Cathar's logic. They were silent, watchful, reassessing what they had once seen as a clever and efficient system. Rostova let the weight of the testimony settle before she spoke again. This is the system the Cathar wish to impose upon us. This is the honor they offer. Not a partnership, but a slow, quiet consumption. She looked directly at the Cathar emissary, her gaze unwavering. We reject it. We would rather have faced the void. We would rather have perished as a free people than live as your well-maintained assets. Her words rang with a conviction that cut through the sterile data of the court. It was a declaration of principle, a line drawn in the starlight. We define ourselves not by how we survive, but by what we refuse to surrender. Just then, Julian's light pulsed urgently beside her. The AI's synthesized voice spoke directly into her mind, a private channel. Commander, I have found it. In the Cathar fleet disposition logs. It is more than a smoking gun. It is a signed confession. A thrill, cold and sharp, went through Rostova. She kept her expression neutral, giving no sign of the bombshell she was about to receive. The Cathar emissary, sensing the tide turning against it, began to issue a rebuttal, its voice regaining some of its earlier confidence. The testimony of these subordinate partners is colored by their own failures to adapt to a more efficient economic model. It is the complaint of the unproductive. The Terrans would do well to learn from their example, but it was too late. The mirror was already in position. The truth was about to be reflected for the entire galaxy to see. Rostova waited for the Cathar to finish its condescending lecture, a predator lecturing its prey on the benefits of being eaten. The pieces were all in place. The audience was captivated. The witnesses had spoken. The villain had revealed the chilling emptiness of their philosophy. Now it was time for the final, irrefutable evidence. It was time to present the bill for a crime the Cathar thought was perfectly hidden. The ledger of truth always balances in the end. The court waited, a silent galaxy holding its breath. Commander. Julian's voice was a blade of pure data in her mind. The logs they provided contained their own undoing. A series of encrypted commands routed through a shell corporation authorizing the deployment of a graviton lance from a stealth vessel. The target coordinates and timestamp match our location, and the moment the stellar flare was triggered. Rostova's breath caught in her chest. The sheer calculated audacity of it was breathtaking. They had not merely found a victim. They had created one. The rescue was the second act of a play for which they had written the tragic first. She watched the Cathar emissary preen in the virtual court, its voice dripping with condescension, and felt a cold, clean anger settle over her. Emissary! Rostova's voice cut through the Cathar's speech, sharp and commanding. The entire assembly went silent. You speak of efficiency and the failings of others. Let us speak instead of your own meticulous planning. The emissary tilted its crystalline head. I do not follow your meaning, Commander. Rostova smiled a grim, humorless expression. Don't you? You have presented us with a bill for our rescue. It seems you have neglected to include the invoice for the service that made it necessary. A deep deception requires an even deeper grave, but the truth will not be buried. Julian, she said, her voice ringing through the Aurora court, display the exhibit labeled Origin Event. The space between the Terran and Cathar platforms shimmered and resolved into a three-dimensional reconstruction of the nebula as it had been. The human fleet moved serenely through the cosmic dust clouds. Then, from a cloaked position, a thin beam of dark energy lanced out, striking the nearby star. The star convulsed, spitting a massive directed flare of plasma. The reconstruction was perfect, built from the Cathar's own navigation logs and energy readings. The assembly saw the human ships engulfed their drives, failing, their hulls glowing with stress. And then, as if on cue, the Cathar fleet appeared pristine and ready. A wave of shock, a pure data crash of disbelief and outrage washed through the court. The sigils of 100 civilizations flickered and pulsed. This was not a salvage operation. It was a farm. The Cathar were not rescuers. They were architects of disaster, harvesting civilizations from the wreckage they themselves created. The predator had finally been forced to describe the hunt. The Cathar emissary stood rigid, its form losing its smooth, polished confidence. This is a fabrication, a desperate, insulting slander constructed from corrupted data. Is it? Rostova challenged, her voice like ice. The data is your own, provided under order of this court. Every waveform, every vector, every command signature is sourced directly from your unredacted logs. She turned to the glowing sphere of the arbiter. We formally retract our defense against the claim of debt. We are no longer the defendants here. Her image straightened, filled with a new and terrible authority. We now stand as the prosecution. We accuse the Cathar Syndicate of conspiracy, premeditated destruction of property, reckless endangerment of sentient life, and attempted illegal indenture. The gratitude tithe was not a bill. It was the final phase of a hostile HFY. Their law was a cage. Our truth was the key. The arbiter's light brightened its synthesized voice, devoid of inflection, but carrying immense weight. These are grave accusations supported by the presented evidence. Cathar emissary, you are compelled to respond. The integrity of this court, and your syndicate's standing within it, depends on your answer. The emissary sputtered, its voice losing its melodic chime, becoming harsh and discordant. It is a lie, forged. The humans are manipulating the data. Then prove it, Rostova countered smoothly. Authorize this court to conduct a live, invasive scan of your flagship's energy core and weapon logs. If the data is forged, the scan will exonerate you instantly. The ultimate bluff. She had no idea if a live scan would work, or if the Cathar could purge their systems in time. But their refusal would be an admission of guilt to the entire galaxy. The silence that followed was damning. Every civilization watching understood. The Cathar were trapped in a lie of their own making, cornered by a truth they had accidentally provided. A system built on lies cannot survive the light of an audit. Finally, the emissary spoke, its voice thin and brittle. We do not recognize the court's authority to violate the sanctity of our sovereign vessels. A gasp went through the assembly. It was the last refuge of the guilty, a desperate appeal to sovereignty to shield a self-evident crime. In the civilian mess hall of the Archimedes, the broadcast of the trial was being watched on every screen. The initial despair had turned to stunned silence, and now a rising tide of fierce, determined pride. The father who had explained the situation with food cubes now looked at his son. "You see," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you never ever let a bully write the rules." The boy nodded, his eyes wide, watching Commander Rostova stand against the darkness, a solitary figure representing all of them. "The Cathar's refusal is their answer," Rostova declared to the silent court. "They have judged themselves. But this is not merely about their guilt. It is about justice. And justice, like the Cathar's own system, requires a balancing of the books." She gestured to Julian. "My fleet mind has been preparing a new ledger. Not an appeal to sentiment, but a bill. A bill for damages calculated according to the strictest tenets of interstellar commercial law." A new projection filled the space, dwarfing the Cathar's original invoice. It was a mirror ledger, a meticulous accounting of the syndicate's crimes, with a price attached to every single one. "Line item 1. Rostova announced, her voice ringing with the clarity of a final judgment. Attempted destruction of a Terran Alliance fleet. Penalty: the full replacement value of all 7 vessels, plus a punitive multiplier of 500% for malicious intent. The number that appeared was staggering enough to bankrupt a small star nation. Line item 2, conspiracy to commit fraud. Penalty: forfeiture of all assets related to the shell corporation used to authorize the attack. A list of Cathar-owned companies and accounts scrolled by. Line item 3, emotional and psychological distress inflicted upon 8342 sentient beings. We have calculated this value based on your own formula for the life value of our crew, using the enemy's weapon to write their sentence. The list went on. The cost of Julian's processing power to uncover the truth. The cost of lost time and opportunity. The cost of the violation of trust that undermined the very fabric of the galactic community. When the final tally was displayed, the number was astronomical, a figure of pure retributive justice. The Cathar emissary was shaking its crystalline form, vibrating with uncontrolled rage. "This is insanity! You have no power to enforce such a claim." "You are mistaken," Rostova said, her voice dropping to a deadly quiet. "You brought us to the Aurora Court. You invoked its binding authority. You believed its power would serve your greed. You will find that its power to serve justice is far greater." She turned to the arbiter. "We ask the court to recognize this debt. We ask for an immediate lien to be placed on all registered Cathar Syndicate assets until this bill is paid in full. Justice delayed is justice denied. We demanded ours at the speed of light." The arbiter's light glowed with an intense, unwavering brightness. "The evidence is uncontested. The counterclaim is validated under the Articles of the Interstellar Compact. The lien is granted." In that instant, across the entire sector, 1,000 financial systems updated. The Cathar's sigil in the courtroom flickered violently as the court's judgment cascaded through the public ledgers. It was a blow not of weapons, but of accounting. A system-scale economic sanction delivered instantly and irrevocably. The Cathar had been so proud of their ledgers, their ability to quantify and control. Now they were being dismantled by the same system, their wealth and power frozen by a debt of their own making. The mirror had not just reflected their image. It had reflected their methods, turning their own financial weaponry back upon them with perfect crushing force. The emissary let out a shriek of pure static, a sound of digital agony, and its image vanished from the platform. On the bridge of the Archimedes, Eris Thorne let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "They're running," he said, half in disbelief, half in triumph. The tactical display showed the Cathar ships, including the emissary's vessel, still holding their position. "They aren't running yet," Rostova cautioned, her eyes fixed on the display. Her victory in the court was total, but the court was a place of light and data. Out here in the cold, hard vacuum, the Cathar still had warships armed with very real weapons. A verdict is only words until it is enforced. Suddenly, the Cathar ships began to glow, their energy signatures spiking. Julian's voice was sharp, urgent. "Commander, multiple weapon ports are opening. They are powering their main drives for a high-velocity burn towards us." The bridge crew snapped to their stations, the quiet satisfaction of their legal victory evaporating in a flash of adrenaline. The Cathar, having lost completely in the arena of law and public opinion, were resorting to the oldest argument of all brute force. They intended to erase the evidence, the witnesses, and the verdict in a blaze of plasma. This was the final desperate act of a predator that had been exposed and cornered. "Red alert!" Rostova commanded, her voice steady despite the sudden lurch in her stomach. "Shields to maximum. Aris, get me a firing solution." This was the moment Julian's calculations had warned against, the possibility that a cornered foe would abandon all pretense of civilization. The AI's light pulsed beside her. "Commander, a direct confrontation is not advised. Their fleet outmasses us 3-1. The probability of our survival in a sustained engagement is less than 17%. This was the conflict laid bare the AI's cold calculus of survival versus the human imperative to stand by a principle. To run now would be to invalidate everything they had just won. A civilization's laws are only as strong as its willingness to defend them. We are not running." Rostova stated her decision absolute. "We won this fight by holding a line. We will not abandon it now." She looked at Aris, whose hands were already flying over his console, targeting the lead Cathar cruiser. The crew, to a man and woman, showed no fear, only a grim, focused resolve. They had seen the truth, and they would not allow it to be silenced by violence. This was their cost of victory, the price of turning a mirror into a weapon. They might die here, but they would die as a free people defending the very verdict that had affirmed their freedom. But they were not as alone as they thought. In the virtual space of the Aurora Court, something extraordinary was happening. As news of the Cathar's blatant aggression spread, the sigils of the assembled powers began to move. First one, then three, then a dozen shifted their positions, moving from the gallery to flank the emblem of the Terran Alliance. It was a symbolic gesture, but one of immense political weight. The most powerful of them, the ancient and respected Cygnian Ascendancy, broadcast a message on all open channels, its voice a low thrum of ancient power. The Cathar Syndicate's actions are an attack on this court and all its members. Any act of aggression against the Terran fleet will be considered an act of aggression against the Ascendancy. One by one, others followed suit. The free worlds of Orion, the Technate of Polaris. Even the Zethani and the other former vassals, emboldened by the verdict, moved their sigils in a quiet act of defiance. The Cathar were no longer facing a single damaged human fleet. They were facing the united condemnation of the entire sector. A single voice for justice can become a chorus. On the tactical display, the Cathar fleet's energy signatures wavered. Their weapon ports remained open, but they did not fire. They were caught in a standoff not of firepower, but of political will. To attack now would be to declare war on half the known galaxy. The seconds stretched into an eternity. The bridge of the Archimedes was utterly silent, every officer holding their breath. The Cathar were facing a choice compound, their ruin with a suicidal war, or accept the most humiliating defeat in their history. The lead cruiser, the emissary's flagship, finally powered down its weapon systems. One by one, the other ships followed their angry red glow, fading back to a neutral state. Then, without a word, without any acknowledgement of the verdict or the standoff, the entire Cathar fleet turned as one and warped into the void, vanishing from sight. They had fled broken not by human weapons, but by human resolve. A cheer erupted on this bridge, a wave of unrestrained relief and triumph. Aris Thorn slammed his fist on his console, a wide grin spreading across his face. "They're gone," he breathed. "They're actually gone." Rostova allowed herself a small, weary smile. She looked at the emblems in the virtual court, the silent allies who had stood with them. They had not fought with ships, but with a shared belief in a principle. That a distress call was a sacred trust, not a business opportunity. That justice was not a commodity to be bought and sold. The arbiter's light pulsed one final time. This inquiry is concluded. The judgment is recorded. The precedent is locked. On the main screen, a public ledger entry blinked into view, stark and clear for all to see. Article 7.4.2 of the Interstellar Compact amended the act of inducing a crisis for the purpose of levying salvage or obligation is hereby classified as a crime of aggression. Privileges associated with the doctrine of gratitude tithe are permanently and irrevocably rescinded. The law was changed. They had not just won their own case, they had changed the rules for everyone. But the victory was not without its price. Julian report. Rostova said, her voice quiet. Our energy reserves are at 9%, Commander, the AI replied. Diverting power to the data warfare and then to maximum shields has left us crippled. We lack the fuel to make the planned journey home. There it was, the tangible cost. They were free, but they were once again adrift, their victory having exhausted the very resources they needed to enjoy it. And there was a deeper cost etched on the faces of her crew. The easy optimism of their exploratory mission was gone, replaced by a hardened, cynical awareness of the galaxy's dangers. They had stared into the face of a civilized evil, and it had left a permanent scar. A message appeared on her console. It was from the Cygnian Ascendancy. Commander Rostova, it read, your courage has honored your species. We would be privileged to offer an escort and refueling assistance for your journey home. No charge, no ledger. Rostova felt a lump form in her throat. Perhaps the galaxy was not as dark as it had seemed just moments before. Perhaps a light once lit could spread. The ethereal glow of the Aurora Court faded from the bridge, replaced by the familiar star-strewn view of the Cradle Nebula. The court beacons were cooling the mirror arrays, dimming now that their reflection was no longer needed. The public ledger entry remained on a secondary screen, a silent, blinking confirmation of what they had achieved. They had come here as debtors and left as lawmakers. They say justice is a mountain. You spend your life climbing, and when you reach the top, you see the endless range of mountains yet to climb. We did not conquer the mountain today. We simply proved it could be climbed. We showed that law can be a shield, that truth can be a weapon, and that a single unified voice can be louder than a fleet. We paid a heavy price in power and in innocence, but we bought something far more valuable, in return a precedent. We taught the darkness a lesson written in its own language of numbers and receipts. The universe balances its own books.